Hey folks, this is Rainiac, and this is a Doctor Who review, but this is a very special Doctor Who review because it's a review of The Day of the Doctor, the 50th anniversary special. Yes, Doctor Who is 50 years old. It's hard to believe, I know, but it is. Now, surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, given the magnitude of this episode and some of the things that happened in it, this story has divided opinions. Some people have said it's the best thing that Doctor Who has ever done. Some people have said that it was okay, but parts of it were disappointing. And some people like Nash have actually weighed in with some pretty heavy criticism, although he didn't criticise all of it. So, where do I stand? Well, before we get to that, I know this gets annoying, I do this every time, but I feel like I have to, because otherwise there'll be one person who doesn't listen to me and then spoils the episode for themselves, and then they'll complain to me, and they'll make it out to be like, I was the bad guy. So here comes the spoiler warning. If you haven't seen The Day of the Doctor, and why wouldn't you, because it was history, it actually broke a record for the most people watching it around the world at one time, 94 countries, people. That's the power of this show now. As I say, if you haven't seen The Day of the Doctor yet, for God's sake, please watch it, and then come back and listen to the rest of this review. Pause this right now if you haven't watched the episode, okay? And then come back and listen to it later. Now that's out of the way, for everyone else who's still listening, we have a lot to get through. Oh my goodness, yes. The title sequence. I was amazed when the episode started with the original 1963 title sequence, and this wasn't just like a reconstruction. Apart from maybe adding a BBC logo, presumably for official purposes, it's the exact same goddamn title sequence, and it's a really nice touch. It's like the show has come full circle. It's 50 years old, but it begins at 50 years, just how it did in 1963, November 23rd, 15 minutes past 5. I think that time is right. I may have got it slightly wrong. Speaking of coming full circle, Clara is now a teacher at Coal Hill School, or as it is now is Coal Hill Secondary School. And that's another nice nod to the past. And you might have not been able to see it because it was on the screen for all of like a second, but the headmaster is listed as I. Chesterton, which for those who have actually seen An Unearthly Child, and quite a few UK viewers will have seen this because they actually showed it on BBC 4 2 nights before the episode went out. I actually saw it the night before the episode went out. It's not a great story. In fact, parts of it are just awful by today's standards. But I felt like I had to watch it just to see how it all began. I mean, the show had to start somewhere, and that's how it started. So I like how they came full circle with that. And as I say, I. Chesterton on the board for Coal Hill School. That's Ian Chesterton, and he was a companion in that story. He was one of the Doctor's original 3 companions, along with Barbara and Susan, his granddaughter. In fact, this entire episode was chock full of references to the past, both old and new series alike, and I'll be touching up on a few of them as they come up throughout the episode. I actually thought that the episode was going to open in 1963 like An Unearthly Child did. I actually thought maybe they were going to show a reconstruction of An Unearthly Child's start to tie into the story of The Day of the Doctor. That, of course, didn't happen when the police officer in the modern-day uniform showed up, and then, of course, the sign said Coal Hill Secondary School, as opposed to just Coal Hill School, as it was back in the 1960s. We then get the Doctor hanging onto the TARDIS as Unit pick it up with a crane, or well, it's actually a helicopter, isn't it? But it was a crane on top of a helicopter, like a winch. That was a nice stunt, and different to make that the backdrop for the credits. Since the new series began, unless I'm very much mistaken, the credits have always taken place in the time vortex, one way or another. So this gave a different feel to the opening of the episode, and almost gave it the feel of a movie. And given the fact that you could actually go and watch this in the cinemas, and another fun fact, this was actually the 3rd most watched thing in UK cinemas this week, other than I think Gravity and The Hunger Games Catching Fire. And given that it was only on for one showing, for one day, right across the country, that's pretty impressive. And again, just goes to show you how much power this show has gone on to have. Okay? We also meet the character of Osgood for the first time. Now, I really liked Osgood, actually. She's wearing Tom Baker's scarf, but that's not the only reason. She actually had a lot of characteristics that kind of reminded me of her being a companion, although of course she wasn't a companion, she's just a supporting character she's just a supporting cast member. But Osgood is very inquisitive, quirky, and she has a lot of faith in the Doctor, despite the fact this is the first time she's actually met him. Now you see why I say she acted a bit like a companion. And this faith in the Doctor, by the way, was when she was cornered by the Zang, she kept going, the Doctor will save me, the Doctor will save me. As it turned out, he didn't. Well, not then he didn't save her, but as it turned out, he didn't have to because the Zygon wasn't going to kill her. Anyway, I'm jumping all over the episode. You kind of had to with Stephen Moffat's stories because, hey, that's what he does. He jumps around everywhere. Now, the segue into the final day of the Time War, I found this a little abrupt, but at least they signposted that it was indeed the last day of the Time War. And after having this mentioned way back when in the first series, I think in Rose was the first mention of it, it's great to finally see the Time War on camera. I mean, how many times have we been teased about it? How many times have we seen it? The End of Time was all about the Time War. The Time Lords escaping from the Time War without ever actually showing a second of the war itself. It was just talked about. But my first criticism is actually about the Time War footage. And the Daleks. The Daleks had to be in this episode, you know, because they're a part of the history of the show just as much as anything else. But they were just reduced to background players again. I mean, how many times have the Daleks shown up in the new series and not been the focal point, not been the centre of attention? Alright, Dalek, the Dalek was the centre of attention. Parting of the Ways, because there was a massive great Dalek fleet trying to invade the planet. Asylum of the Daleks, yes. Doomsday, okay. Daleks in Manhattan, yes, it's in the title. But other times the Daleks have appeared, they have been supporting cast members, just like Osgood was. They didn't even get to exterminate anyone in the classic sense of the word. They did kill plenty of soldiers, but they just sort of blew them up. Not that I'm complaining, but I'm not complaining because they didn't happen to do the classic X-ray, death ray. You know, they exterminate, they shoot the ray, and they go, you know what I mean. You've seen this show by now, good grief. At least I hope you have, anyway. And the fall of Arcadia was first brought up back in Doomsday, so that was another nice link to the series gone by. Now, I love the bit where the TARDIS flew through the wall and destroyed all the Daleks, especially since they decided to cap it off with a triumphant blast of Words Win Wars. This is a piece of incidental music by Murray Gold that was first heard back in the Pandorica Opens when the Doctor is addressing all the spaceships at Stonehenge. In fact, there was a lot of music from previous series, and I'm a bit of a Doctor Who music buff, I have to admit that right now. It was almost like a greatest hits of the revived series soundtrack. I heard Impossible Girl, Long and Endless Dalek Night, which was being played as the Daleks were wreaking havoc in Arcadia. The Madman in the Box was played several times, and I'm sure there were quite a few more that I didn't catch. Another slight plot hole, though, about the Time War. In the End of Time, and I'm going to be referring to the End of Time a lot, I'm afraid, so just bear with me. In the End of Time, it's established that the Time Lords went mad and tried to find any way they could to escape the horrors of the war. However, the character referred to here as the General and the Time Lords under his command don't seem particularly mad. The General references High Command, so that could be referring to Rassilon and the others who were trying to escape in the End of Time. But just to muddy the waters further, later on the Doctors referred to the General and those Time Lords as High Command themselves. Was this a continuity error or just a mistake that crept into the script and they didn't realise that it happened? Possibly. We then got Billie Piper's first appearance as Rose, although as we later found out she wasn't actually Rose, she was the moment, the consciousness of the moment, the weapon that the Doctor was going to use to end the Time War, burn Gallifrey and kill everybody. And also she was Bad Wolf. Now I have to give props to a friend of mine, to Omega Zoltan. Months ago, he read about the Comic-Con trailer, which we only saw 2 weeks before the episode went out. Get it together, BBC. But he read about this trailer, and he said to me, from the sounds of this, mate, it doesn't sound like Billie Piper is going to be Rose as we know her. It's going to be Bad Wolf. And at the time, I kind of said, well, why on earth would Bad Wolf be in the special instead of Rose? Well, now I have to eat humble pie, and Omega Zoltan has to take a bow, because he was exactly right. I actually really enjoyed Billie Piper's performance as the moment in this episode. she was a lot more mature than Rose was in Series 2, although she still had moments of playfulness when she was basically going, no more, over and over again. And also when she said, are you afraid of the big bad wolf? And her role throughout the story was to challenge the War Doctor's beliefs and act as his conscience, almost. And by the way, just a little aside here, I hate having to call John Hurt's character the War Doctor. I will for the purposes of keeping the numbering right, so it doesn't get confusing. I will call him the War Doctor, or just John Hurt, but I don't like that. Why couldn't they have called him, I don't know, the Warrior? Because if you've watched the prequel with the minisode with Paul McGann, The Night of the Doctor, and again, if you haven't, why not? It's fantastic. He says, make me a warrior now, so that would have been a perfect title for this incarnation of the Doctor to take. Then he is no longer the Doctor. Instead, he's the War Doctor, although he's now referred to on camera as the War Doctor again. It's just confusing. David Tennant then comes in. Now, I was a big David Tennant fan during his original run. Other people, not so much. And there is a tendency these days to look at Matt Smith and then look at David Tennant retrospectively and go, oh, David Tennant wasn't that good as the Doctor. Yet these same people, when David Tennant was the Doctor, were going on about how good his performance was. Come on, guys, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I love the scene where the 10th Doctor was threatening the rabbit, thinking it was a Zygon. I thought that was a nice scene. As was the scene where the two Doctors were comparing the size of their screwdrivers, because, you know, that wasn't a penis gag at all. But it was a nice visual joke. I have no idea what was the point of the 10th Doctor getting the two versions of Elizabeth to run in opposite directions, however. I mean, if someone can explain this to me in the comments, and I've missed something, then by all means tell me, because to me that just seemed very nonsensical. But speaking of Elizabeth, I thought Joanna Page played her very well, and much like Matt Smith had to play two versions of the Doctor back in Nightmare in Silver, here Elizabeth had to play two versions of... Elizabeth, my god, yes, Elizabeth I came back through time to play herself. Or forward in time to play herself. No, Joanna Page had to play two versions of Elizabeth. The real Elizabeth and the Zygon Elizabeth. And I thought she did a very good job with that. And she actually fooled me when she took over the role of the Zygon Elizabeth after she killed her in the forest. I honestly thought that that was how they were going to get out of the Doctor marrying Elizabeth. It was going to be a Zygon duplicate, and therefore the marriage never actually counted. That's not what happened, and I'll go into the plot hole that a bit later on. Now, one of my favourite parts of this entire episode was all the interplay between John Hurt, David Tennant, and Matt Smith. They were all playing different versions of the same character, and yet they had completely different personalities, and that's the whole point of the regenerations. Each incarnation of the Doctor is completely different to the last. And I just thought the three of them, whenever they were on screen together, it was just brilliant. The dialogue was really good, and these three actors can really perform. So, yeah, love the interplay between the three Doctors. And John Hurt criticising the other two when they're wielding their sonic screwdrivers like weapons. He calls them water pistols. That kind of echoes real-life criticism the fan base has had, that the sonic screwdriver in recent years has become kind of a magic wand that can do absolutely anything to explain away elements of the plot. I think also the bit where they're in the Tower of London and John Hurt says he can disintegrate the door, but it'll take him 400 years. That's another reference to this. And that's another scene I like, when they figure out that because there's 400 years between themselves, the sonic screwdriver is ready to disintegrate the door, and then it just opens and Clara walks through. I thought that was hilarious the first time I saw that. Second time, not so much, but yeah, I still think that was a really good moment. Speaking of moments, do you see what I did there? Was it ever actually explained why the 10th and 11th Doctors couldn't actually see Bad Wolf, or the moment? I mean, it's obvious that she was a plot device, but I don't think there was any explanation offered within the storyline itself, was there? Again, I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, please feel free to let me know how wrong I am in the comments below. I also love the concept of the Black Archive, an archive that is so top secret, so dangerous, that the staff have to have their memories wiped after every shift. I love that. And I did some digging on this, and I actually found out that the Black Archive has been mentioned before in spin-off media. But I believe this is the very first time it's been seen on television. And there were some strange items within this Black Archive. For some reason, River's shoes were in there, and the pinwheel that a young Amelia Pond had back in, I want to say the 11th hour, but certainly young Amelia had it at some point in between series 5 and 7. My God, that's not being vague in the slightest, is it? What these items were doing in the Black Archive meant for weapons of mass destruction is anybody's guess. Speaking of the Black Archive scene, the code that Clara puts into the Vortex Manipulator, that's the time and the date of the first episode of Doctor Who. It was kind of hard to see because, again, it was another blink and you'll miss it, but the thing the Doctor was scratching on the wall, it kind of looked like Dorium's name at first, and I was thinking, why the hell is he scratching Dorium? But on closer inspection, it was actually the date and the time of an Unearthed Child first being broadcast in the UK. And then we, of course, got John Hurt realising that Tennant and Smith were his successors as the Doctor. And I loved Rose's line of the man who regrets and the man who forgets. That is an absolutely perfect way to sum up the different personalities of both Doctors. Now, as I said, I really like the scene where Clara just burst in with the door unlocked. But here's the thing. Would the Zygons really have just left the door to the cell open? I mean, isn't that kind of taking a huge risk? Because they've encountered the Doctor before, they've dealt with the Doctor before, and presumably he's defeated them. Well, he has defeated them back in 1975, Terror of the Zygons. Another line I got a kick out of when it was revealed that Elizabeth really was the real Elizabeth and not the Zygon duplicate. I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but at the time so did the Zygon. Again, I got a kick out of that. And more dialogue that I got a kick out of when they're in the TARDIS. The three Doctors are in the TARDIS with Clara, and Tennant goes, "Oh, you've redecorated. I don't like it." That's actually a reference back to the Three Doctors because I can't remember if it was Pertwee and Trout. No, it would have to be Patrick Troughton saying it to John Pertwee because obviously John Pertwee at the time was the most recent incarnation of the Doctor. So yes, that makes sense. I haven't actually seen the Three Doctors, I'll confess. Maybe I should. And Fresno has been trying desperately to get me into watching more classic Doctor Who, and maybe I'll see it one day. But I know for a fact that line was in the Three Doctors because somebody pointed it out to me. Now, the way the Three Doctors got into the Black Archive, it was a clever way of doing it, but surely that opens up a whacking great plot hole. I mean, the painting was smashed open and the remains of a Dalek was blown to smithereens and crashed straight into the Black Archive. But if the picture is smashed, what was to stop anything else from that painting getting through? I know it's a frozen slice of time, as they call it. And then again, if it's a frozen slice of time, how did the Three Doctors get into it and then move? Did they step through the TARDIS with the screwdrivers already out, knowing there was a Dalek there? It just opens up a lot of plot holes that didn't really need to be there. Not to mention, of course, there were gigantic explosions going on at the time, so why one of them didn't just rip through the painting and just take everybody out, goodness knows. Well, I know why, because of the convenience of the plot. That's why. But it could have easily been solved by just having the Doctors reseal the painting with the Sonics. Although then, of course, you'd have the whole point of the Sonics being a magic wand again. And speaking of the Sonics being a magic wand, John Hurt says less than 25 minutes ago before this happens, they're not weapons, they're not water pistols, they're scientific instruments. And then he's right there happily using them to push a Dalek into oblivion. If that's not a weapon, I'm not sure what is. Now, I like the way also that the Doctors got the Zygons and the humans to reach a stalemate. But there could be another way of looking at this if you dig a little deeper. Matt Smith says the line, "Peace in our time." Well, the 11th Doctor says the line, "Peace in our time." This sounds like a throwaway line, but it could have a bit more significance, possibly. For those of you that don't know your history, this was a line that was first spoken by Neville Chamberlain at the time he was the British Prime Minister, back in 1938, in regards to the policy of appeasement, which was heavily criticised. And less than a year later, World War II broke out. So are they foreshadowing consequences of this encounter in the Black Archive? Or am I reading way too much into it? It's entirely possible that I am. But either way, I really wouldn't be surprised to see the Zygons make another appearance as early as Capaldi's first series, Series 8. And once again, we have Clara making a massive impact to the Doctor's life, because it's she and not the moment's consciousness. The moment? The moment's consciousness, Bad Wolf, whatever you want to call her. It's Clara that stops him from pushing the big red button. I think in some ways, Clara is rapidly becoming the most significant companion of all time, at least if the new series is ever to go by. Okay, so Rose saved the Doctor in Series 1. She saved the world in Series 2. Martha, in the year that never was, saved the world. Donna, of course, became the Doctor, half Donna. And Amy rebooted the universe. So they've all had significant moments where they've got to save the day. But Clara, more than any of them, has saved the day because she's been present throughout the whole of the Doctor's life, or versions of her, as was revealed at the end of The Name of the Doctor. So she is becoming the most significant companion of all time, at least as the new series goes. I know there are a lot of companions in the old series, and maybe they did something even more significant, but that's just the way I see it. And then we come to the last 15 minutes or so of this episode, and this is the most contentious issue by far. Gallifrey's fate. Or, moreover, the changing of Gallifrey's fate. Some people I know have taken absolutely no issue with this. Some people think it's a step too far, which I would tend to agree with. Some people think it's a slap in the face to Russell T Davies. And some people would go as far as to say it makes the last 7 series completely irrelevant. I will say this, it's a cop-out. No doubt about it. One of the big hooks of the Revive series, when it started back in 2005, was that it was different to the old series because the Time Lords were no longer there. He was the last of the Time Lords. Except, of course, there was the Master. And then he died, and he was the last of the Time Lords. Except, of course, the Master came back. And then he died, and then he disappeared again, so he was the last of the Time Lords. Except, in this episode, we find out he isn't at all, because Gallifrey isn't gone. It's just frozen in time somewhere and hidden away. Now, this completely messes with continuity. Moffat was clever enough to write in a failsafe where he says that the Doctors won't remember this, so they'll still think that Gallifrey is gone up to this point in the Doctor's life. Again, I'll touch on that a bit more later. I'm not sure if Stephen Moffat really needed to rewrite the end of the Time War. Personally. I mean, it's a great scene and all. Brilliant scene. And it deserved to be in there. But it did just kind of gloss over what we've been building up to for the last 7 years. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. I'm in two minds. I mean, again, I'm sure people will be telling me I'm being stupid. I should just enjoy it for what it is instead of trying to dissect the story and nitpick every little hole in it. But no, goddammit, this is the 50th anniversary. Is it really wrong to expect it to make some goddamn sense? I mean, I know Stephen Moffat likes to play with time, but maybe this was playing with time a little too far. Was it clever? Undoubtedly. But it was also very, very difficult to follow. And having said all that, and I don't want to come across as a massive hypocrite, but having said all that, all 13 Doctors showing on screen together was truly an amazing moment. The word has been used far too much these days, but it was epic, okay? It was absolutely epic. I could not believe my eyes when Peter Capaldi showed up. I know he was on screen for maybe a second, and all you saw were his eyes. And by the way, that was clever, because it means we don't actually get to find out his catchphrase until, if he even has a catchphrase, until he shows up at the end of the Christmas special. There was another throwaway line that may have larger significance in the future again, though. No, sir, all 13. Could Stephen Moffat be hinting that Peter Capaldi is the last Doctor? I personally think not, because I think as long as the show is popular, it will continue. But we'll have to wait and see. And another great line, oh, for God's sake, Gallifrey stands. Clever way of showing the War Doctor, there I go again. Clever way of showing the War Doctor's personality and how he differs from his contemporaries. I was going to say predecessors, but then of course 3 of them aren't his predecessors. They came after him. 4 actually, because the 9th Doctor showed up for a cup of coffee for about a second. And then the biggest plot hole of the episode. Remember how I said at the end of time we'll get quite a few mentions? Here's another one. John Hurt says he won't remember any of these events because the time streams are out of sync. Okay, I'm fine with that. And neither will David Tennant. This is Stephen Moffat's way of keeping the continuity the same. But here's the thing. If the Doctor can't remember anything until this point in his history, how come at the end of time he can clearly remember marrying Queen Elizabeth I? Because he says, good Queen Bess. Let me tell you, her nickname is no longer, well, you get the idea. So he clearly remembered that. And that marriage happened to Elizabeth within the events of the Time Fisher being activated. So he shouldn't really be able to remember this. So I'm afraid it's another big plot hole. John Hurt's regeneration was nice. It was a throwback to the first Doctor's transformation into Patrick Troughton when he says wearing a bit thin. Those are the exact same lines that William Hartnell said in his final story. It's a shame they couldn't convince Christopher Eccleston to come back just for that scene, though. I know he said he wants nothing more to do with the show, but would it really have killed him to just come back for a few seconds just to complete the regeneration? Instead, we just had to make do with Christopher Eccleston's eyes superimposed over John Hurt's face, which just looked odd. I mean, I shouldn't complain because now with the Night of the Doctor and then this, we have now seen every single regeneration of the Doctor up to David Tennant into Matt Smith. But I don't know. I think for the 50th anniversary, Eccleston could have possibly put his, I don't want to call them principles, put his reluctance to come back to one side just to film a few seconds. He didn't even need to have dialogue, possibly. I don't know. It just left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Speaking of regenerations that leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth, we finally get some justification at the end of the 10th Doctor's awful last words. Come on, I don't want to go was awful. But now we find out it should have been, I don't want to go to Trenzalore, because the 11th Doctor informed him that's where he's heading. However, once again, how on earth can the 10th Doctor remember this when those are his final words, and yet he's told about Trenzalore within the events of the Time Fisher, so again, he won't remember it. I mean, even the 11th Doctor has a cheeky dig at it, saying he always says that. Again, I think this was just something thrown in because it was a cool thing for the episode, not because it benefited the story. But then we got perhaps the highlight of the whole thing, okay? Also, the big shock of the episode. Now, I was keeping clear of any and all spoilers. I did not want to be spoiled more than anything, not even for the purpose of this review, for anything that could happen in the 50th anniversary. So as soon as I heard Tom Baker's voice, I knew it sounded familiar. And then when he actually showed up as the curator, I couldn't believe my eyes again. Tom Baker is a terrific actor, okay? I've seen him in a couple of Fourth Doctor serials. Most notably City of Death, which I reviewed with Freezing Inferno. He was brilliant then. He's still brilliant now, even after nearly 40 years of last playing the Doctor on screen. Just take a look at his face. Even though the scene is only about 2 minutes long tops, he's just so damn expressive in that scene. The anguish on his face. I mean, you might be thinking, why does he have anguish on his face? He's actually telling the 11th Doctor, it's good news, Gallifrey is still out there somewhere. But just look at the anguish on his face. It's just brilliant. But here's the thing. Who exactly was the mysterious curator? Was he a future version of the Doctor? Because it's kind of hinted at by the dialogue when it says, if I were you, maybe I was you, or maybe you are me. I don't believe he was, however. My personal theory is that he's the moment, taking on the form of an elderly version of the Fourth Doctor to let the current Doctor know that the plan actually worked. It's also possible that he was someone else entirely. Perhaps he was another Time Lord. Here's my point, though. Does it actually matter who the curator really was? I'm not actually sure we'll ever get an explanation, and for once, I'm okay with that. I'm one who loves to have things explained to me within the context of the story, rather than having to figure it out for myself, usually. But this one time, I'm fine with it. Seriously. Because here's the real purpose of the curator, okay? Nothing to do with the storyline at all. It was to add a nice little scene between Tom Baker and Matt Smith and get the actor who played the Doctor for the longest tenure into this 50th anniversary special, and also to act as a reward for the fans for their continuing devotion to the series. And it fulfilled that purpose brilliantly. And bonus points, by the way, to Murray Gold, who I think is a brilliant, brilliant composer, for playing the Wedding a River song over the whole scene. Although, thankfully, they did cut it off before we heard the Here Comes the Bride bit. We last heard this when River was saying her farewells at the end of Name of the Doctor, and this now seems to become a staple theme for moments like this, where it's the Doctor interacting with a significant, I can't even say it, a significant character from his past, and it's an emotional scene. The Wedding of River song did this, the Name of the Doctor did this, and now, of course, the Day of the Doctor did this. And it was a really neat touch to end the 50th anniversary by giving the Doctor a new sense of purpose and a new mission. Gallifrey falls no more. Right under our noses, and yet I have to confess, I didn't foresee that one coming. Maybe some people out there who are cleverer than me, or perhaps read the spoilers beforehand, because apparently there were leaks about Tom Baker's role, and there were leaks about Gallifrey. Not that I was in any hurry to find them. I just thought it was a nice twist. It's good that we end the 50th anniversary not by looking back at the show's history, but by looking forward to the future. The Doctor now has a sense of purpose, renewed again, and a new mission to find Gallifrey, but I don't think he'll do it in this incarnation. I think that'll be reserved for Peter Capaldi and possibly whoever takes over the role of the Doctor after Peter Capaldi. And we ended the episode with a great shot of the 12 Doctors, but it did look a little off, don't you think? I mean, you had John Hurt, David Tennant and Matt Smith moving around in the middle, and then every other Doctor was just stationary around them. Now, I know it couldn't be helped because 3 of the actors are dead, and they wanted to show them in their heyday, so to speak, as they appeared as the Doctor. But, come on, I mean, Tom Baker looked like a wax dummy. In fact, I've been reliably informed that Tom Baker was a wax dummy in that scene, and it's quite possible some of the other Doctors were as well. Certainly when you see the shot of the back, it really gives the game away because the hairstyles just look completely off. So either they were body doubles who weren't particularly convincing, or they were models, they were dummies, they were wax models posed to create that whole shot of the 12 Doctors. And then we get the end credits, and the end credits perhaps the greatest end credits in the show's history. I know hyperbole is the greatest thing ever, but seriously, I just loved it. And I want this rendition of the theme that played throughout those credits to be the one used from now on to open the show, but somehow I doubt I'll get my wish there. So overall feelings on the Day of the Doctor then. There were a lot of plot holes. You could fly a TARDIS through the plot, and at one point, of course, they did, 13 of them to be precise. And normally, this would greatly annoy me. But for once, I'm not that bothered. Because this episode wasn't so much about delivering a story, it was about entertaining people. It was about celebrating the history of the show more than anything else. And on that front, it absolutely delivered. There were a ton of references to the past, both visual and verbal, and the interactions between the 3 Doctors were excellent. And John Hurt's performance as a tortured soul Doctor was superb. And I do like the fact that at the end, he got his redemption. He'll never remember it. He'll still think he tried to burn Gallifrey, and up until the point that Matt Smith takes over, and there's that scene in the Undergallery, he will think, actually not the Undergallery, was it? It was the main gallery. The Undergallery was sealed off. He will think that he destroyed Gallifrey, but at least for that tiny moment of redemption, and so for that tiny moment in time, he gets his redemption, and he is the Doctor once again, and that's why he regenerates, by the way, into Christopher Eccleston. Because there's no more need for the warrior, the Doctor can come back, and the best way to do this is for him to regenerate. Although some people have suggested that maybe this was because the potion he took wore off. I personally don't buy that theory, because I don't think it was a temporary transformation. I think it was a full regeneration that just happened to be influenced by the potion he drank on Khan. But that's just me. So yeah, I thought John Hurt's performance was absolutely terrific. It's kind of a shame he won't be able to come back to the series now, because that's it for his Doctor. Some people want a John Hurt miniseries, and I'd be fine with that, but I think, to be honest, he's in too high demand for that. People also want a Paul McGann miniseries, which Paul McGann himself has said he would love to do. So I see no reason why that couldn't happen. I have to agree with Nash, though, because something about this episode did feel a little off. For all the feel-good moments and the great scenes and the fantastic acting throughout, something did feel a little off, and as such, in years to come, it may not be viewed as the classic it could have been. Don't get me wrong, though, it was still really, really good. Now, there wasn't much of a trailer for the Christmas special. We now know that, by the way, is called The Time of the Doctor, and I'm not a huge fan of that title. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to link in the name of the Doctor, the night of the Doctor, the day of the Doctor, the time of the Doctor, but it doesn't sound quite right. I personally would have preferred Silent Night, but that's just me. But one thing they did show at the episode was very exciting. The Daleks are back, again. The Cybermen are back, again. The Weeping Angels are back, and that's going to be fascinating to see how the Doctor reacts, because this is the first time the Angels will have shown up since Amy and Rory died. So it's going to be fascinating to see how he reacts to them. But most exciting of all, perhaps, certainly for me, the damn Silents are back! Yes! I have long stated that the Silents should have been involved in Matt Smith's regeneration story, so I'm very happy that Stephen Moffat has apparently granted my wish. So that was a very long review of The Day of the Doctor. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagreed with anything I've said throughout the course of this review, or you want to discuss things further, the comments are right below. Please feel free, as long as you keep things constructive. You're not just, oh, you're wrong, your opinion sucks, LOL. I'd like to think we're a bit more mature than that at this point, guys. Come on. But other than that, please let rip and let's have a discussion. There's nothing wrong with a civilized debate. So I will be back then for the next review after Christmas. Exactly when after Christmas, I don't know, because I don't know how busy I will be at Christmas. I've got relatives coming over. I, of course, have the whole holiday of Christmas to enjoy. And it's one of my few times I don't have to work, so I will be taking full advantage of that. But whenever that review is, probably a few days after Boxing Day, whenever that review is, whether it's myself or with bringing the gang back together, you know who I mean when I say the gang, by the way, I will be reviewing The Time of the Doctor and Matt Smith's Swan Song. So until then, I hope you've enjoyed this review of The Day of the Doctor. I've been Rainiac. Bye for now.